keeping up with all the changes in business and tech these days, it can feel impossible, right? Like just when you think you've got a handle on things, everything shifts.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution.
Exactly. So that's why we're here doing another deep dive to give you, the learner, a clearer picture of these big transformations.
It's like a shortcut to understanding.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're looking at how established companies, those big, long-standing players and those super agile startups are both navigating this kind of blurry line, this convergence between the digital world and, the actual physical world around us.
That's a really fascinating area.
It is. And our guide for this is Robert Siegel's book, The Brains and Brawn Company.
Oh, yeah. I've heard great things about that one.
Yeah, it's excellent. Siegel has a ton of experience. He lectures at Stanford. He's a venture capitalist, and he advises some major companies.
So he's seen it all from a lot of different angles.
Exactly. And we should also give a shout out to the translator, Shay, for making this perspective accessible to a wider audience.
Definitely. Translation is so important for sharing these ideas.
Absolutely. So our mission for you today, the learner, is to get the key takeaways from Siegel's framework. His core argument is that real competitive advantage today doesn't come from just being digital or just being physical, but from this powerful combination of brains, those digital and intangible strengths, with brawn, the more physical operational side of things.
It's like it's not one or the other. It's both working together.
Exactly. And it's not just Siegel who thinks this way. His book has some serious endorsements from leaders at companies like, we're talking Johnson & Johnson, Accenture, Charles Schwab, 23andMe, Target, Box, Peloton. I could go on and on.
That's quite a range.
It is. Axel Springer, SE, NEA, which used to be GE,
Yeah.
AB InBev, SAP, Stoneco, Dartmouth, Digital Transformation Institute, Taiwan, Hanhai, Fubon Media Technology.
Yeah, you can stop now.
Yeah. You get the picture.
Definitely. Big names, diverse industries.
The point is, they all agree. To be successful, you need to blend that digital intelligence with real-world execution.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
Right. Okay, so let's break down this brains and brawn idea. What's Siegel really getting at here?
So his main point is that the strongest companies today, they don't just excel in one area or the other. They find a way to make those two sides, brains and brawn, work together. They leverage the digital side, the data, the agility, the innovation, and they combine that with their existing physical strengths, their operations, their logistics, their ability to actually make and deliver things.
Like, they're not ditching their factories and supply chains. They're finding ways to enhance them with technology.
Precisely. Think of it like chocolate and peanut butter. Two great tastes that are even better together.
I can get behind that analogy.
Right. Or in the music world, you had Lennon and McCartney, each talented on their own, but when they collaborated, magic happened.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So for you, the learner, understanding this integration is absolutely vital.
Whether you're in a strategy meeting at work, trying to grasp a new industry, or just curious about how businesses work, this is key.
This is how the world operates now.
It's not just about being good at tech or operations. It's about knowing how to blend the two.
And Siegel isn't just pulling this out of thin air. His insights are based on real-world experience. He teaches these courses at Stanford, The Industrialist's Dilemma, and Systems Leadership. These are courses packed with Fortune 500 executives, startup founders, you name it.
So he's getting perspectives from both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and he's also involved with venture capital firms like Exceed Capital and Piva Ventures, so he sees how investment decisions are being shaped by this convergence.
So he's got that big picture view of the whole landscape.
Exactly. He talks about leaders like Craig Menear, who, heads up Home Depot, a classic example of operational strength. And then you've got someone like Ann Wojcicki over at 23andMe representing that digitally native, data-driven approach.
Fascinating contrast.
And Siegel even shares this personal aha moment he had during the pandemic.
Oh yeah, tell me about that.
So he's teaching at Stanford, right? And suddenly, the whole world goes online. Yeah. And education, this thing that's always been so physical, in person, it had to adapt and fast.
He had to figure out how to teach effectively on Zoom, essentially.
Exactly. And that experience, it was like a microcosm of what so many businesses were going through on a larger scale.
Having to figure out how to make their physical operations work in a digital world.
Exactly. Adapting or perishing. Okay, so we've established that brains and brawn need to work together. Let's dig into what Siegel means by brains. He breaks it down into 5 key capabilities. First one is the left brain, which is all about...
They do analytics, right?
You got it. It's about leveraging data, Not just collecting it, but actually using it to make smarter
To
decisions.
improve customer service, to make better products, to control costs.
All of that. And a perfect example is Charles Schwab.
Yeah, they're managing trillions in assets. They've got mountains of data on their customers.
And they're using it, but in a way that respects privacy and builds trust. They've always been forward-thinking, pioneers in discount brokerage, early adopters of tech. And their current CEO, Walt Bettinger, he's all about customer satisfaction.
They even cover ATM fees for their clients.
Exactly. It's those little touches that show they value their customers.
It's a really different approach from, say, Facebook, where data optimizations seem to take priority, maybe even at the expense of users' privacy.
Yeah, that's a cautionary tale, isn't it?
The Cambridge Analytica scandal really showed the downside of not handling data ethically.
Right. The takeaway here is that data is powerful, but you have to use it responsibly.
And the way you use it, that can be a huge competitive advantage.
Absolutely. Think about it. A traditional umbrella manufacturer, they might only get sales figures from their distributors, limited insight into the actual customer.
But a company like Amazon, they have a direct connection to millions of customers.
They know what you buy, what you browse, what you review. It's a completely different level of understanding.
Okay, so that's the left brain, the analytical side. What about the right brain?
That's all about driving creativity.
So not just coming up with a clever ad campaign. It's about constantly finding new ways to meet customer needs.
Exactly. It's a continuous process of innovation.
And Siegel uses Align technology, the makers of Invisalign, as a great example.
Oh, yeah. They've completely changed how people think about teeth straightening.
No more metal braces for a lot of people.
And they've done it by combining digital imaging with 3D printing.
And they also have this really interesting partnership model with dentists and orthodontists.
They found a new way to reach customers, disrupting a very traditional industry.
Clever. Okay, next up is the amygdala. Now, this one might sound a little strange in a business context.
Right, because the amygdala is that part of the brain associated with emotions.
But in Siegel's framework, it represents leveraging empathy.
Exactly. Companies with a strong amygdala capability, they're good at understanding and connecting with their stakeholders.
Not just customers, but their own employees and their partners, too.
It's about building genuine relationships, understanding people's needs and perspectives.
And the example he uses is Kaiser Permanente, the healthcare giant, under Bernard Tyson's leadership.
Tyson really made empathy a central part of their approach.
Which is not something you typically associate with managed healthcare.
Right, but Tyson shifted the focus. He emphasized that their mission wasn't just providing healthcare, it was improving people's health.
And they use technology to understand the needs of their doctors and nurses.
So they could create a system where everyone was working towards the same goal, better health outcomes.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the part of the brain associated with planning and decision-making.
And in Siegel's model, it represents risk management.
Which is interesting because in business, there's often a natural aversion to risk.
Especially in larger established companies. But being too risk-averse can stifle growth.
You have to be willing to take calculated risks to stay competitive.
Exactly. And Siegel points to AB InBev, the global brewing giant, as an example.
What did they do?
Their CEO, Carlos Brito, actually created a position called Chief Disruptive Growth Officer.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah.
But the idea was to have someone specifically focused on finding ways to disrupt AB InBev's own businesses from within.
To proactively innovate before someone else disrupts them.
Exactly. It's like embracing controlled chaos.
So that's the prefrontal cortex, the risk-taking brain.
Right. And finally, we have the inner ear, which might seem a little odd.
Hey, what's the connection to business there?
Well, the inner ear is all about balance, right?
Yeah.
And in Siegel's framework, it represents the need to balance ownership and alliances.
So figuring out what to keep in-house and what to outsource or partner on.
Exactly. In today's world, no company can be an expert at everything.
Especially with all the rapid advancements in technology.
Right. You've got cloud computing, artificial intelligence, big data. It's overwhelming.
So you have to be strategic about where you focus your resources.
Exactly. And Siegel highlights Instacart as a company that's been really good at this.
Oh, yeah. They've become a major player in grocery delivery.
And they've done it by building this intricate network of partnerships with grocery stores and independent contractors.
It's like they're orchestrating a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And they've had to be really agile, adapting to things like Amazon buying Whole Foods and the huge surge in demand during the pandemic.
Okay, so we've covered the brain side of the equation. Now let's dive into Brawn, What are those physical operational capabilities that Siegel talks about?
Right. So first you've got the spine, which is all about logistics.
Getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time.
Exactly. It's the backbone of any business that deals with physical goods,
And it might not seem glamorous, but it's absolutely essential.
especially in today's world of instant gratification and high customer expectations.
And Siegel uses Best Buy, Home Depot, and Target as examples of companies that have really nailed this.
They were all supposedly going to be killed by the retail apocalypse, right?
Right? Everyone thought online shopping would wipe them out.
But they adapted. They've used their physical stores and their logistics networks to create new, more flexible shopping experiences.
Like buy online, pick up in store.
Exactly. They've strengthened their spine with digital brains.
Makes sense. Okay, what's the next Brawn capability?
The hands, which represent the art of making things.
So manufacturing.
Exactly. And despite the trend of offshoring manufacturing to lower-cost countries, we're actually seeing a resurgence of manufacturing in higher-wage economies.
Really? Why is that?
It's driven by advancements in technology, things like advanced manufacturing, robotics, and 3D printing.
So it's becoming more cost-effective to produce things domestically.
Exactly. And Siegel uses desktop metal as an example.
They do 3D printing for metal parts.
Right. And they're not just selling machines, they're building relationships with customers, providing customized solutions and support.
So they're not just about the tech, they're about the whole manufacturing process.
Exactly. It's the art of making things, but in a modern, tech-enabled way.
Okay, next we have simply muscles. What does that represent?
Leveraging scale. Being big still has its advantages.
Economies of scale.
Right. But it's not just about being big, it's about being smart about it.
So what's the key?
Siegel calls it global operations. Thinking globally, but acting locally.
So having that global reach, but also being able to adapt to specific markets.
Exactly. And he uses Michelin, the tire company, as an example.
They're huge. Global manufacturing, engineering.
Right. But they also empower their local managers to tailor products and services to specific regions.
So they can adjust to different needs and preferences.
Exactly. They understand that what works in one market might not work in another.
Smart. Okay, the fourth Brawn capability is hand-eye coordination.
And this is about orchestrating ecosystems.
Ecosystems.
Yeah, think of it as a network of organizations working together. Suppliers, distributors, tech partners, even sometimes competitors.
It's like a complex web of relationships.
Exactly. And managing this effectively, it requires a lot of finesse. It's like hand-eye coordination.
You need to be able to see the big picture and make adjustments on the fly.
Right. And Siegel points to Google's Android operating system as a great example, although he acknowledges it's a unique case.
Because they control the platform, but they also have this huge ecosystem of phone manufacturers and app developers.
Exactly. And they've managed to strike a balance, keeping control of the core platform, but allowing for customization and differentiation.
It's like they're conducting an orchestra.
Perfect analogy. Okay, and finally we have resilience, which is pretty self-explanatory.
It's about survival, right?
Ultimately, yes. It's about navigating economic cycles, managing your reputation, maintaining your financial strength.
It's about being able to withstand shocks and adapt to change.
Exactly. And Siegel highlights Johnson & Johnson as a company that's been remarkably resilient over its long history.
They've been around since 1886.
Think about that. They've seen wars, recessions, pandemics.
And they're still going strong.
Right. And one of their keys to resilience has been their approach to technology.
They see it as a tool, not a replacement for their core values.
Exactly. They haven't been afraid to embrace new technologies, but they've always done it in a way that aligns with their mission and principles.
So that's Brawn, the 5 physical operational capabilities. And, all this ties into this bigger concept that Siegel introduces, system leadership.
Yeah, this is where it all comes together.
So what's system leadership all about?
It's about seeing the big picture, understanding how all these brains and brawn capabilities interact and influence each other.
So it's not just about being good at one thing, it's about being able to manage the whole system.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond those traditional silos like marketing, finance, operations.
And seeing how they all fit together.
Exactly. And Siegel uses Katrina Lake, the founder of Stitch Fix, as a great example.
Oh, yeah, they do personalized clothing styling.
Right. And Lake really understands all the different facets of her company.
Fashion, data, branding, culture.
She sees how they all connect, and she manages the whole system effectively.
So, to really illustrate this brains and brawn framework, Siegel looks at two companies going through major transformations, Daimler and 23andMe.
Great choices.
Yeah. Let's start with Daimler, the automotive giant. They're definitely strong on the Brawn side.
Oh, yeah. Long history, engineering expertise, the iconic Mercedes-Benz brand.
But they're facing huge challenges from those digitally focused disruptors.
Electric vehicles, autonomous driving, ride-sharing, connected cars, the Chinese market, it's a lot.
Plus, they have to manage their relationships with dealerships, which are going through their own upheaval.
It's a whole new world for them.
And they're making moves in all those areas. In electric vehicles, they've set some aggressive targets, and they're investing heavily in production facilities.
Remember that little Twitter exchange between Daimler and Elon Musk?
Oh, yeah, that was interesting. Musk was basically saying, you guys are spending peanuts compared to Tesla.
It just highlights the pressure these traditional automakers are under. They have to manage this massive transition while still running their existing business.
It's not an easy task.
Not at all. And in the autonomous driving space, Daimler's exploring partnerships like with Uber and making investments in technologies like Here Maps.
They even did that early demo with the self-driving Mercedes S-Class years ago.
Yeah, they've been at this for a while, and their strategy seems to be a mix of in-house development and collaborations.
They're hedging their bets a bit.
Smart move in such a rapidly evolving field, and they're also involved in shared mobility. They've acquired and invested in platforms like Car2Go, Movable, and MyTaxi.
So they're recognizing that car ownership might not be the only game in town in the future.
Especially in cities. People are looking for alternatives. And then, of course, there's the whole connected car thing. Daimler developed their own system, Mercedes-Me.
They wanted to control the in-car experience, rather than just relying on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto.
Right. They felt they could offer a more premium experience that way. And then there's China, which is a whole different beast.
Huge market, but incredibly complex.
The regulations are always changing, the competition is fierce, and you have to really understand the Chinese consumer.
Siegel tells this anecdote about the government changing the requirements for electric vehicle range and battery sourcing multiple times.
It's a dynamic landscape, to say the least. And it's not just about technology and regulations. Daimler also faces cultural challenges.
Like attracting top tech talent when they're competing with the excitement of Silicon Valley companies like SpaceX.
Right, where Elon Musk is talking about going to Mars.
It's a tough sell.
It is. And they've also had labor union issues, like that protest at the battery factory in Germany.
Yeah, it's a big cultural shift for a company like Daimler. They have to balance their traditional strengths with this new, more agile, tech-driven mindset.
And they need to bring their dealers along, too. The move to electric vehicles, it could disrupt their business model.
Fewer trips to the mechanic, for one thing.
Right. Daimler needs to find ways to ensure their dealers stay profitable in this new world.
So when Siegel scores Daimler on his brains and brawn framework, they get a total brain score of 25 out of 50 and a brawn score of 40 out of 50.
So strong on brawn, but still catching up on brains.
Right. He thinks they might be lagging behind in utilizing customer data and maybe trying to do too much tech development in-house.
Trying to control everything can be a disadvantage in this fast-paced environment. Okay, now let's look at 23andMe. They started as a brains company, all about DNA testing, but now they're moving into pharmaceuticals.
That's a big leap, from spitting in a tube to developing drugs.
It is, but it's a natural progression. Their CEO, Anne Wojcicki, always saw this huge potential in genetic data.
To revolutionize healthcare.
Exactly. So let's go back to the beginning. Wojcicki, she had this background in biology, and she was frustrated with the healthcare system.
It was slow, inefficient, expensive.
Right. And then she has this meeting with Marcus Stoffel where they talk about all this genetic data that's not being used effectively.
The data was there, but no one was really doing anything with it.
Exactly. And then Sergey Brin gets involved and Linda Avey, and they launch 23andMe. The name comes from the 23 pairs of human chromosomes.
I never knew that.
See, you're learning something new every day. So they launch these DNA testing kits, and people go crazy for them.
People are fascinated by their ancestry and their health risks.
And a lot of those people agreed to share their data for research, which became a huge asset for 23andMe.
They started publishing their own research, contributing to scientific understanding.
They became a major player in the field, but then they hit a snag with the FDA in 2013.
Oh yeah, the FDA wasn't too happy about them providing health information directly to consumers.
They were concerned about accuracy and potential misinterpretations, so 23andMe had to pull back on their health reports and go through this rigorous process to get FDA approval.
Which they eventually did, for a limited number of reports.
Right. It was a setback, but they adapted. And then there was that controversy about their BRCA gene testing for breast cancer risk.
Some experts were critical of their approach.
Yeah, it highlighted the challenges of interpreting genetic information and communicating it clearly to consumers. 23andMe had to be very careful about what they claimed their test could do.
It's a sensitive area. But despite these challenges, 23andMe kept growing. They got venture capital funding, they tried subscription models, they partnered with companies like Lark for wellness programs.
They were exploring all kinds of avenues.
But Siegel argues that their real long-term success depends on their ability to develop their own drugs.
That's where the big money is.
Right. And that's why they made this big move into drug development. They hired Richard Scheller, a top scientist from Genentech, and they started collaborating with big pharma companies like Genentech and Pfizer.
They were building a pipeline.
And then they formed this massive joint venture with GSK. That brought in a ton of money and expertise.
GSK's got the experience in drug development, manufacturing, and global distribution.
It was a perfect match. And now their first jointly developed cancer drug is in clinical trials.
That's a big milestone. It shows the potential of their approach. But there are still questions about their future.
Will the GSK partnership be successful? Can they balance their consumer business with the demands of drug development?
Time will tell, but it's a fascinating story.
So on the brains and brawn scale, 23andMe scores a 44 out of 50 for brains and a 38 out of 50 for brawn.
Strong on brains, but still building up their brawn.
Makes sense. So what are the big takeaways for you, the learner?
Well, both Daimler and 23andMe show that even companies with huge advantages have to adapt. The future belongs to those who can combine digital brains with physical brawn.
It's not one or the other, it's both.
Exactly. And think about your own field. What seemingly opposite forces need to be integrated for future success?
What connections are you missing? It's worth pondering.
And if you want to dive deeper into Siegel's framework, definitely check out his book, The Brains and Brawn Company.
He goes into much more detail about the 10 traits and provides other fascinating case studies. And as always, the learner, remember that the business world is constantly changing. Understanding these fundamental forces, how digital and physical capabilities interact, that's key to navigating the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.